Hey David, thanks for coming on. I guess to begin with, do you want to give a bit of an introduction of yourself? I know you're an author of a few books, and just tell us and the audience who you are and what is it exactly that you do.
Yeah, hi Cam, hi Aaron. It's great to meet you. Great to be here, and thanks for reaching out. I am an author, and I call it a star myth explorer. For the past 15 years, I've been exploring the overwhelming evidence that the world's ancient myths are part of some vast interconnected system. And that's myths from around the entire globe, including cultures that, according to the conventional paradigm, should not be connected. So we find patterns around the globe of, for instance, a baby being put into the water. In the Moses story, baby Moses has to be hidden, or Pharaoh and the Egyptians are going to kill him. So his mother puts him in a little basket and sets him adrift in the among the reeds of the Nile River, and then the daughter of the Pharaoh finds him. And that story pattern is found around the world. We find babies getting put into the water. A baby gets put into the water in the myths of ancient Japan. There's a ancient record in Japan called the Kojiki, where a baby is put into the water. And in the Mahabharata, uh, there's a baby who's put into the water, and down the I think it's the Ganges, might be the Indus. Now I'm forgetting, but in the Maori and across the Pacific, there's baby Maui gets thrown into the sea foam by his mother. So this is across cultures that should not be connected. There's others too that I'm just giving some examples here. The myths around the world have these patterns that repeat over and over, including, you know, in the Americas and the Norse myths from northern, way northern Europe, Scandinavia. There should be no connection there, and yet there are. From the Maya myths and the Norse myths, and yet there are. And across the oceans to India, Africa, um, ancient China, ancient Japan, around the world. So this evidence is really abundant, and it's been talked about for centuries that myths have connections with the stars. And that includes the stories in the Bible, by the way, and I'll show a
Mhm.
few. But they've been taken the, they've been taken literally. Obviously, the
Yeah.
biblical stories have been taken literally, and that is a huge part of Western history. The Roman Empire got basically taken over by Christianity somehow. That how that happened is a very interesting story. And then shortly after that, the Roman Empire split in half into Western and Eastern. And what you have, Western Europe is basically the Western Roman Empire. It became very literalist Christian, and Christianity was used as a control mechanism for the feudal era of Europe. And basically, that brought in the Dark Ages. That was the destruction of the ancient knowledge in the West. And in other places, the ancient knowledge didn't get destroyed as aggressively as it did in the West.
Mhm.
So we still have, in China and India, you still have a kind of a stream that continues. And in Africa, that wasn't as disrupted as it was in the West. But anyway, that's what I've been exploring for the past 15 years, is showing the reason for this connection is there is some kind of an ancient worldwide system based on the stars where the actual characters can be shown to connect directly to constellations. I mean, Moses is a constellation, Jesus is a constellation, the Buddha is a constellation. I can show that. I have shown that it's part of this esoteric system. And so I've written 11 books on it. I have courses on, on demand courses, just a few. I've done four of those. But if people are interested in learning that system, I've been publishing as much as I can to show how it works. And it's just a passion that I wasn't even looking for. I was taking the Bible literally. Although I loved the myths, I didn't think the Bible was myths. And so it was a real world changing um, discovery when I started to realize not only are all the ancient myths connected and they're connected to the stars, but this same system is operating in the Bible. So I had to change my whole worldview, my whole outlook
What
on everything.
what was it that made you link these ancient myths to the stars?
Right. So, Aaron, good question. I always grew up loving myths, even when I was very little. I had lots of books on myths. I had a lot of exposure to myths, mainly Greek myths and Norse myths. On my dad's side of the family is Norwegian, so I was drawn to the Norse myths, but the Greek myths, of course, are kind of infused through a lot
Yeah.
of literature. So I loved the Odyssey and I loved the Greek myths. And I also loved the stars. My dad used to take me out to look at the stars. And so I always loved those two things, but I didn't put them together until I read a book called Hamlet's Mill. So Hamlet's Mill was written in 1969 by these two professors. They were already older when they wrote it. And it was mentioned in a book by Graham Hancock. And a lot of alternative researchers about ancient history have mentioned Hamlet's Mill because the authors of Hamlet's Mill say, oh, look at this story about using a jawbone as a weapon. Samson in the Bible uses a jawbone as a weapon. Well, isn't it interesting that in South America, there's a myth about someone using a jawbone as a weapon from a different animal? And Maui actually uses a jawbone of his grandmother to, as a weapon. What's going on here? And it's around the world. And they also show in that book, so it's a very haphazard book and it's not a well organized book, and a lot of people find it a frustrating book. It is frustrating. I think the authors should be commended for seeing this pattern and having the courage to talk about it, because academically that was not a uh, popular thing to say. Well,
Yeah.
all cultures are connected. What are you talking about? The history department is like, get right out of town and don't come back. The other thing they mentioned that really caught my attention, so they stumble around saying there's some kind of connection and it appears to have to do with planets and stars, but they don't really draw out how it works, why. But I give them all this credit for seeing it. And then I got obsessed to try and piece it together more because I already knew a lot about the stars and a lot about the myths. And it turns out I knew a lot about the Bible. Every time they mentioned, oh, and these Bible stories too seem to be based on the stars, I was like, no, 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 no. The Bible's based on, Samson was a historical person. Don't call him a myth. But the more I pulled on that string, the more I realized that it's completely myth. I'll tell you what it was that changed my mind, Aaron. But the other thing they mentioned that's super interesting is the recurrence of numbers that have to do with precession. So the precession of the equinoxes is this very, very slow, ages long change in the heavens, where the heavens are delayed by about 1 degree every 72 years. And it's very subtle. It's hard to see it because by delayed 1 degree, I mean the background stars that the sun is in on a particular day from a particular place will be 1 degree back after 72 years. That's like the width of your finger after 72. So you have to take very careful readings for 72 years, like start when you're 5, and by the time you're 79, or 77, you'll see 1 degree of change. It's a precise measurement, but that number 72 and its multiples then show up around the world. There's 108 is 72 times 1.5, and 432 and 216. These are numbers that are incorporated in, like, the ratio of the pyramids to the earth is 432. They mention a ritual, the Agni Kayana ritual in ancient India, which uses bricks, and they use 100. They build an altar for the fire. It's a fire ritual. They build an altar with 108,000 bricks. Or the Vedas are supposed to have I think 432 million syllables or something like that. It's all these numbers keep repeating in myth. And in the Norse myths, they mention the Agni fire altar that's built with 108,000 bricks. And then they mention in the Norse myths, there's a passage about Ragnarok when the twilight of the gods is going to come, and the great cataclysmic battle at the end of time, or the end of this age, this world. It's actually, they're talking about processional ages, but the Valhalla, the heroes that come out of Valhalla, it says, well, it will be the 400 doors. There's a passage that says how many doors there are in Valhalla. Fourscore. I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but 8 warriors can walk abreast through each door, and if you multiply it out, it comes to 432,000 warriors. And they mentioned that in Hamlet's Mill, and I said, whoa, how could there be, these number patterns around the world, Norse myths from ancient India in the Vedas? What connection is there? And because I was very keyed into the stars already, I understood the constellations pretty well. I could actually start seeing constellations that Hamlet's Mill didn't get. And so I kind of became like the Hollywood stereotype of the guy who has the shed with all the strings and the map, he's getting really obsessive about it and trying to take it further than what they did. And, I believe I've probably taken it further than, anyone I've seen in history. But there was an English preacher in the early 1800s who talked about how the Bible stories were based on constellations. And he did a tremendous job. His name was Robert Taylor. He was born in the late 1700s, died in about 1832. But he was a preacher. He lost his job. He lost his income because he was saying, well, I've discovered that the Bible is based on the stars. And they locked him up in jail. They said, well, this is heresy. You can't teach this publicly. And they threw him in jail for a total of 3 years. So this has been talked about by people in the past. I would say Robert Taylor got it. He got it closer than Hamlet's Mill in terms of the connections to the stars. But I disagree with him on what he thinks it was all about. He thinks it's all about just fooling people. I think it's part of an ancient system that's actually for positive purposes. But just like martial arts can be used, martial arts are an ancient system, Kung Fu, that can be used to defend the helpless, or it could be used to bully people. So same thing, this ancient system could be turned to, deceive and trick people, or it could be used to uplift people. So long answer to your question. I would like to throw it back and just find out, because I don't know that much. I've just kind of glanced around at a few of your videos that you have. Can you just tell me a little bit about how do you know one another, and what's the genesis of Alt-ernative, and why'd you call it that and put the hyphen there? And
so we're brothers, first of all. That's how we know each other.
Okay, right on. You live in different cities, but you're brothers.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why we set the channel up. So when I moved down to London about 4.5 years ago, and it was just before the pandemic actually, and I found myself on the phone to Cam quite a bit, and we were just talking about what's going on in the world, like how fucked up everything is, talk about all the conspiracies out there, and was like, do you know something, we should just start recording these conversations because they're actually really interesting, and there might be an audience out there who want to listen to him, but it's just like a little project that we set up. The reason we chose alternative is because we started thinking with an alternative mindset. Like, we stopped listening to the mainstream media and started thinking a bit more critically about the information we're being presented. So we want to call the channel Alternative because it's an alternative perspective. Also, we don't really align to like traditional right and left. So we want to like be like an alternative in that aspect as well. So you've got like the alt-right and the alt-left. So we picked Alt-ernative. So that's why the hyphens there.
Right on. Yeah, that's interesting. So,
But when we initially set up the channel, it was very heavy politics. We went down the politics route quite heavily.
Yeah.
And then we met with, when we did the podcast with Brandon, we had a massive awakening on that podcast, and he changed our perspective on the world. And now we're going down sort of more spiritual path, and it feels a lot more positive now than it did. The content we're putting out feels more positive than it did before, which I think is a great thing.
We definitely had to go down that politics and conspiracy within government route to get to where we are now. Because I don't think if we had the conversation with Brandon to begin our journey altogether, I think a lot of it would have gone over our heads. We felt like the conversation that we had with Brandon at that time was very much perfect. It was very much ideal to where we were at, and we were ready for some sort of an awakening or moving up to another stage of an awakening. Yeah, we started the channel just me and Aaron talking, and then I think we just invited a guest on at some point, someone we just came across, interviewed the guest, and thought we just turned into these sort of we've always been curious minds, but I think something within the podcast triggered us to think, actually, we've got these ultra creative, ultra curious minds. So let's just talk to everyone. We're not really judgmental people. We don't judge people on their beliefs. We literally want to hear everyone's thoughts and their reasons for their thoughts, and just get a whole view of the world. Weird, wacky, and wonderful, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. And actually, it's interesting. I just yesterday spent almost all day putting together a video that I haven't published yet, but it talks about, because I think we need both. The spiritual, you talk about, well, we were political, now we're spiritual, or, we need both the spiritual fulfillment and the individual level, but also the economics and the system and the geopolitics and the, colonialism and imperialism. Look, I used to be conservative and right when I was younger. I was in the U.S. Army. I just kind of assumed, hey, America is this great force for good and defending freedom and democracy. Really, this awakening of the Bible being based on the stars changed my whole worldview on an individual level of, religion, or, I was a literalist Christian. And I'm definitely not now. And I think literalist Christianity is very dangerous. And actually, if it's fulfilling for individuals, that's fine. But actually, it ends up, I believe, having it's very problematic even on the individual level. And I talk about that in my most recent book. But also, that changed my whole political outlook on the world. And I would say that I would now be categorized as left, except the left has been completely changed by the economic decision. This is what I talk about in this most recent video, which hasn't been published yet, but it's interesting that you just kind of brought it up about right, left, we're alternative to either one. What happened was the United States deindustrialized and the West deindustrialized, meaning they shipped all their manufacturing to China deliberately in the 70s for economic reasons. And I talk about that in this book, which, be very interesting to someone who studies international business. I don't know if you've heard of Yanis Varoufakis. He's a Greek minister. He was a minister of finance. I think he was the anyway, he explains why Bretton Woods had to come apart and then why deindustrialization happened. Well, when deindustrialization happened, what did the left used to stand for? Labor. What is labor? What is labor? labor is like steel workers. Labor is like auto workers, right? Being able to have a 2-day weekend was actually a victory that labor had to fight for back in the early 1900s. It used to be, work 6 days a week, work 7 days a week, work 80-hour weeks. Getting a 40-hour week was a victory of labor, 150 years ago that we still enjoy today. But basically, when you deindustrialize, what does labor have left to fight for? They're not fighting for workers' rights anymore. The power of labor has basically been crushed to where now you're, an Uber driver with no guarantee of this, or you're a temp casual worker with no guarantee of that. And, try going on strike. If the steel workers go on strike, that gets someone's attention. If the auto workers go on strike, that gets someone's attention. If you're a bartender and you go on strike, you're just going to get fired and another bartender is going to come in, right? So the power of labor has been crushed. And if the left, why am I going off on this tangent? Because I believe the myths actually talk to things on a societal level and on an individual level. They answer both, the spiritual on the individual level, because a good job doesn't necessarily fulfill you spiritually. But now it's like, well, forget about having a good job. Let's just self-actualize and be spiritual. Well, no, that's a problem. Like, if you can't buy a house and you can't afford to get married, why is that? It's because of the economic conditions that we have. You're going to be frustrated, and you can say, well, I guess I'll just tap into spirituality and forget about, I'll just you need actually both. I don't think it's right to just drop out and only look at spiritual. And so sometimes people say, why are you talking about politics? You've got this beautiful myth research that you do. Well, because the myths talk about economics. The myths are, and that's what this video says. Look, the myths were against oligarchy. And that's the problem that we have today, is oligarchy. Anyway, I won't restate my entire video, but they're both connected.
It's me and Cameron were having a discussion about this the other day, and it's about striking the balance between the physical world and sort of the metaphysical world. Like, you can have somebody who's so just into spirituality, they use it as escapism from the physical world, and the life around them in the physical world could be a complete mess, but they're so just lost in the spiritual world. Or you could have somebody who's so materialistic and all they focus on is buying that big house and a new Ferrari. They've just disregarded anything to do with the spiritual side, and they're still unhappy. So from both sides, you can be unhappy, and it's about finding that balance between both worlds.
That's right. And I've mostly focused on, so I believe that the myths are against oligarchy. So that's a societal level, and they're for the healing of trauma. That's on the individual level. And we'll maybe talk about it a little bit, but both of oppressive, tyrannical, or oligarchical system tends to use trauma to keep people from overthrowing it. So they go together. So if you can't just focus on one, I don't think. And I'll just close the loop on what I was saying about the left. So if the left had their entire industrial economy shipped out and deindustrialized, that is when the left turned into what it is today. It is no longer working for any sort of economic improvement for standards of living. Now they've basically both been captured by the oligarchical, I would say, like financial, like private equity and Wall Street are dictating a lot of what both parties do in the US. And this is reflected in the conservative labor split in all the Western countries. Basically, labor, which used to be for the workers, has been captured by Wall Street. I mean, the Clintons and Obama are as much, donors from private equity and doing things to help private equity and the bank, mega banks, as the Republicans. So basically what you have is both sides have been captured by oligarchy, and no side is actually the old left. And so what happened when they no longer had an industrial fighting for a shorter work week or better conditions for workers, less exploitation of workers. Now they just latched on to anything and everything. Well, let's talk about Looney Tune stuff, which is just a distraction, like you're saying, as the oligarchs are completely happy for people to squabble over which bathroom people get to go to or which pronouns people employ, because that's not going to change anything about the cost of a mortgage. Does that make sense? So, long rant. Sorry, but it's interesting. I just was interested in the story that you.
I can 100% relate to what you're saying, because what I 100% found is we went, because of the situation with the pandemic and everything that is going on with the left, which is plastered all over sort of mainstream media at the moment, we went quite deep into the conspiracies, just the bitterness of it all, and the negativity within it all, which in a sense you can call it negativity, but it is what it is. It's what's happening, and either like it, accept it or don't. So we went quite deep into that, and I think there became a point for me and Aaron both, because we were both doing it on the channel, that we sort of hit our limit of resilience in a way. And that's where the sort of we saw spirituality not as escapism, like some people would use spirituality as a form of escapism to just cut off from reality completely, just like what Aaron was saying. We saw it as I guess a window, a door was opened, and we was like, let's just poke our heads through and see what's going on over here. And we saw it as an opportunity to grow for ourselves, build ourselves a little bit stronger. And then we went quite obsessive into the spirituality sort of realm, and then had the conversation with each other like, this has been like crazy. We feel like completely different people after we've been through it. What should we do? Like, how should we go about it further? And it was with guests, getting guests on, like which guest should we go for? And then we was like, let's try go down the political route again and see. Let's see now how we handle it. Let's see if we can take it. Let's see if we're better for it, because I do believe there's only so much of that the physical side of the truth of what's going on that you can take before you could literally like explode. So you need something like spirituality to help you, guide you, and make you realize that you are much bigger than the system that you live in. As a person, you are much bigger, and you mean so much more than the system you're in. So now we're in a really good balanced point. I would say that we can look at it and think, and in a weird way, laugh at what's going on and say, it's kind of mental what's happening, but it is what it is. Let's just try and make more and more people aware the best way we can, without sort of crying about it and resorting to violence or anything like that. Let's just talk, communicate like we should do, and get messages out there, and obviously learn as well with other people.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think I always thought it was fascinating that, like, the Shaolin Temple tradition in China, where they do these amazing martial arts, is connected also with, well, you have to meditate on compassion. And, like, if we're going to give you this very powerful martial system, you have to become a spiritually centered person, or you're going to, fly out of control.
Yeah.
And I have found that always to be a very interesting juxtaposition. And it's like the ancient wisdom understood that there is a need to, stop oppression or stop rape. If someone's being raped, you have to be able to jump in and stop it. Or if that's happening on a international level, if a people is being completely, metaphorically raped, like what's happening right now, the world is in a very precarious spot. A very, you could have World War III potentially take place. So it's like we're talking about important subjects. Anyway, so those two are important to I think, have balance. So I really appreciate your introduction of how your podcast has evolved, and that's, you'll see in my slides that I'll show in a second here. What I believe the myths are talking about is on both of those levels. They are addressing both of those levels as critically important. You can't have just a perfectly materially beneficial society that uplifts everybody if everybody's like feeling hollow inside and alienated and spiritually, like you said, not connected to the truth that we are so much more, that we are this. Nobody can explain even consciousness. I mean, human consciousness is incredible. It's amazing when you look at some of these studies of things that can happen. Anyway, so all that's to say, thanks for that background. And also, I just want to find out, what is your favorite Tarantino film, since you've got Pulp Fiction there behind you, Cam?
That's the one.
That's it. Okay, Pulp Fiction for Cam. Aaron?
Mine is, I only watched Pulp Fiction recently, but mine's Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, I like Inglourious Bastards a lot. And I would say Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is mine, which is controversial. Some people, even Tarantino fans, don't like it.
Some people
but I did do a YouTube video breaking down some of the connections that I see between Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Inglourious Bastards.
Ooh,
so do you know what does Inglourious Bastards start off with? On the first, you know how it has these little screens where it says Act 1 or Chapter 1, Chapter 2. The first screen is just, I think, a black screen with just some words that end with ... I'm pretty sure if you take a look at it, it starts off with Once Upon a Time ... and then boom, it goes into Monsieur Petit, or that whole scene.
Glass of milk.
So the glass of milk. So I did a YouTube video about 6 months ago talking about both of those. What is Tarantino up to in those two incredible movies? Anyway, good. So that's, connecting. That's like the world. He is talking about things that are going on in the world, but he's saying Once Upon a Time. What do we start on? What traditionally starts with Once Upon a Time?
Fairy tale. Yeah.
A fairy tale, like a myth. Fairy tales are related to the myth. And he's saying, I'm going to tell you a fairy tale. Why? Why is Tarantino telling you a fairy tale about these very important, the Manson killings and the Nazis and the way they surrendered?
Yeah.
Those are deep, heavy, violent, uncomfortable, unpleasant topics full of, they're important topics. And he's going to tell us a fairy tale about them.
Manson was heavily linked to the CIA as well, right?
Absolutely was. Heavily was. And I'll tell you guys, absolutely. Just for context, I was born like a month before those killings. So I was born in 69. I was born in July of 69. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s when deindustrialization and this big shift was happening. So it was like the transition between the days of that the baby, I'm in between the baby boom and the millennials, obviously, and like right in the heart of Gen X. Was born in 69, was the peak of Gen X. The baby boom was in the industrial growth of the West, re-industrializing after World War II. Everyone gets a new washing machine, get a new car. Standards of living going up. Everybody's kind of expecting things to get better and better. Deindustrialization happened. There was this kind of like tapering off, and then now things are now people are expecting things to get worse and worse. Like, change is going to happen. We can be nostalgic, but we know that change is going to happen, but we hope that the change is always for the better. And I think what's happening is people are realizing the changes for worse and worse and worse all the time. What the heck is going on? So all right, well, we shot a lot of different ideas around. Do you want me to show the slideshow now, or do you have some specific questions or directions you wanted to go, or anything you wanted to?
I do have some questions around. Well, actually, yeah, no, go into your slideshow, and then I'll ask these questions afterwards because it'd be good to get an understanding, a visual understanding of stuff first. And I've got some questions for you.
Yeah, and you might cover some of the questions in your slideshow as well.
Right on. Yeah, have you checked out some of my stuff? Have you seen some of my videos or anything before?
I briefly saw you on Brandon's channel, but I didn't watch the whole thing through because I felt like I was ruining what I was learning because I was talk to you.
Because what?
Because we were going to talk because we'd booked it up
right.
and I checked you out on there and I thought I'm going to wait. And
yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, let me.
But before we start, what's your favorite Tarantino? Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but Inglourious Basterds would be my second favorite.
What did you think of the Kill Bill?
I didn't like him, and I'll tell you when I didn't like him that much, but I should probably go revisit it. Like Inglourious Basterds and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when I saw those, I said, "This man is a genius." I didn't I didn't give him his full credit before. And I'm old enough to remember when Reservoir Dogs came out and nobody heard of Tarantino, and we watched Reservoir Dogs, and I was like, what the hell is this? This is so violent and just kind of brutally, casually violent. I said, I hate this guy. Now, I was also a literalist Christian at the time.
Right.
And then I think the second one I saw was From Dusk Till Dawn. And I was like, what, this, have you seen that one?
Yeah.
I was like, this man's insane. I'm not watching any more of his movies. Now, I will say my other favorite Tarantino film is True Romance. So I did love that one the first time I saw it. He wrote that but didn't direct it. So
no,
Tony Scott, I think Tony Scott directed it. But anyway, I did like True Romance, and it's got some of that same very gritty violence. It's very interesting. True Romance, there's a higher self twin in True Romance, right? Have you guys seen True Romance?
No.
Nope.
Oh, you got to check out True Romance. Okay, so go watch True Romance. It came out in, I think, 86, 87, maybe.
Yeah.
Check that out. It's before Reservoir Dogs.
That's the only Tarantino I've not watched.
Reservoir Dogs?
No, True Romance. I've watched Reservoir.
Okay.
I love Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, well, I might have to revisit it, but there's some that you can watch over and over, and there's some you can't, I would say. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I really like what he's doing in that movie. It's very, very profound, I think. But
I need to rewatch that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
So much going on in there. It's super, super interesting. And I think my breakdown of it may help people who hate it.
I'm going to give your video a watch, your crossover video.
Give it a check. But yeah, so I think I've already kind of laid out what my research delves into, that the world's ancient myths are based on the stars. Oh, and just, you mentioned Manson, MK Ultra. Have you read the book by Tom O'Neill or heard Tom O'Neill on any podcasts? So there's an author who spent literally 20 years and he wrote a book called Chaos.
Oh, I started reading this book. I started reading it.
Yeah. It's very thick and it's like encyclopedic. And it's got tons of footnotes, and it's a devastating critique of the conventional story that we've been told about the Manson operation. It was an operation. It was absolutely an operation. And so I would say that the best way to get a hold of his theory is to listen to him on podcasts. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on tons of podcasts. The author of O'Neill is his last name. The author of Chaos, Manson, and the CIA and the death of the 60s or something is what it's called. But it's Chaos. If you look up Chaos O'Neill on your podcast search and listen to like 10 different podcasts with him, because it's such a vast topic.
Yeah.
He can only talk about, some aspects of it in any given 2-hour period. And if you listen to maybe 10 of his different podcasts, you'll get more of a big picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's probably easier to do that than to read the book. As
I
much
started the book on the Kindle, and
yeah,
it was just, I don't know, I didn't have the. You need to have a lot of concentration to go through that book, and
yeah,
it's one
yeah.
of them.
Yeah, because it's also the story of how he uncovered all this information in a
Right.
story that was already 20 years, it was like a cold case, and he was assigned it in like 1999, which was the 30-year anniversary of 1969. And he was supposed to publish it in 1969. He didn't publish it till 2019 because it took him 20 years to chase down all these, rabbit holes and loose ends. And he doesn't really come right out and tell you his ultimate position. He says, figure it out for yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
But I believe he's writing a sequel. Anyway, very important. Like the Manson killings was the death of the hippie movement, the counterculture movement in the left, or the assassination of the hippie movement in the left. So there was a grassroots rejection of a lot of materialism and kind of just standardized white picket fence culture because it wasn't spiritually fulfilling. But, and also, of course, against the Vietnam War. But then the Manson operation was created in order to turn people against it. Like, look at these crazy left people. And that was really the death of the old left, or the, standing for what it used to stand for. And then they brought in just absolute clowns in order to subvert what was actually, I believe they were very afraid of the anti-war movement, the direction that the youth was going. And so they had to try and subvert that. And they did with the Manson operation. Anyway, super important, and it's connected to all the things we were talking about.
Yeah. So, is that what would you say that's because they could see as the sort of wealth gap increases as time goes on, and as we've seen it increase, that gap between the rich and the poor, they needed to get rid of all stabilization within sort of the low end of the wealth, because that group's going to grow. That means the left's going to grow. The labor workers are going to grow. The people that want rights to be able to earn the correct amount of money is going to grow. So they saw this coming way back into in the 60s then, and said, we need to mess this up now. We need to push this off track now, because that's going to get into a bigger beast than any of us can control. And that's all it comes down to in the end, is the control that they
control. It's a very insightful, perceptive question, Cam, because I think they did start to see this in the 60s. The assassination of JFK, 63. He was the first, young president. He was by far the youngest president. And what you had was this huge youth movement. If you were, after World War II was the baby boom, that was a huge, potentially scary group for the establishment. And by 63, they were 20 years old or 18 years old. They were old enough to vote. They were old enough to be drafted. They were old enough to, back then, economically, you could get married at 18 or 19 years old, buy a house, and start raising a family. That was economically
on one income, right?
On one income. And have a rising standard of living. Today, people can't even fathom that. Today, people can't fathom. There's another economist, Michael Hudson, that I like to listen to, and he says, if the soldiers returning from World War II were told, hey, congratulations, the war is over, and in about 50 years or 70 years, your grandchildren will have to work 3 jobs just to have a lower standard of living than you are probably going to have, their jaws would have hit the ground and they would have said, what are you talking about? That's insane. 3 jobs? What? Yeah, the man will, work 1 job and the woman will work 2 jobs, or the man will work 2 and the woman will work 2. That's what they'll have to do just to keep up, just to pay the mortgage and the healthcare. Anyway, the assassination of JFK was the first it was like he was the first candidate that the baby boom was really excited about. And then Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, that was look, we're eliminating all the leaders of the real left. I would say that what Martin Luther King was standing for was he was marching on Washington, jobs for everybody, get out of Vietnam, and also end racial discrimination. But he was for all these things that's what the left used to stand for. Today, the left stands for, well, just more and more crazy things that get people to say, "Oh, I hate the left." Well, but you don't know what it's actually about, because it was killed, it was assassinated, it was deliberately dismantled. And anyway, I didn't intend this to become a
but I get it's a very interesting point that you raised, because when you do look at the left now, they're all over the place. Even the people that consider themselves left don't know what they're supporting properly, because they might support aspects of what the left support, but because there's so much chaos there, it's kind of impossible for them to agree with every single thing that the left put out there. So it's like there's no stability there, but it's built on the fact that they've got no belongingness, they've got nothing to work towards, so they're just plucking things out of thin air to say this isn't right. Look, it's not right, and then they're all sort of like hustling. That's how it feels, like they're quickly rushing around it, like, yeah, it needs our attention, it needs our attention, because they're all striving for some sense of belongingness, and they're finding it in these, what I would probably call niche groups, like these niche problems.
Identity politics and identity issues, and
very niche stuff, but they're making it mainstream because they need to belong to something.
Yeah, it's a very important subject, and it actually relates to, like I keep trying to say, let me relate it to what I'm talking about. So the ancient wisdom informed, the ancient Greek myths, the ancient Roman myths, the ancient gods of the West. The West had gods. Ancient Egypt had multiple gods. Ancient Greece had multiple gods. The Romans had multiple gods. The Etruscans had multiple gods. In France, they had multiple gods. If you read the Roman authors talking about, oh, when we went to fight the Gauls, well, they have a god who's just like Hercules. They call him this. And they have a god who's just like Mercury. They call him this. And so they recognized it was multiple gods everywhere. Literalist Christianity was the end of the gods and the ancient wisdom. It was a deliberate rejection of the ancient wisdom. It was an overthrow of the ancient wisdom. It was a takeover. And that led to feudalism, dark ages, tremendous drops in standard of living, and oligarchy. In the West was basically run by warlords. They lived in castles because if they didn't, the people would kill them while they were sleeping, because there was a small amount of them and a whole bunch of serfs who were just screwed. They couldn't own the land. They couldn't even, if you were born on this plot of land, you couldn't go farm a different plot of land. You had to farm that plot of land, and you didn't own it, and you coughed up whatever the landlord asked for whenever he asked for it. So, if he wanted to have a big roast pig for dinner, he'd said, "Give me a pig," or the sheriff came and took the pig. So what is that? That is feudalism. That's oligarchy. The ancient system is against oligarchy. So they destroyed the ancient wisdom, and then oligarchy. I'm talking Western history now, but what was the French Revolution? This is where left and right comes from, right? Left and right came from which side of the assembly you sat on during the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, the people who sat on the right, which side would the members of the Christian church sit on in the assembly, right or left, do you think? Right.
Really?
That's the established order. Absolutely. The church was part of the oppress the peasants. One way to keep the peasants down is the lords have all the weapons, all the horses, and they live in castles. Okay, but still, if there's 1 million people and 500 lords, we could still bring you down. So the church is an important part that says, hold on, God has ordained the king or the duke or the whatever. He's better than you. And if you kill him, you'll go to hell forever. This is the established order. So the church is part of the mind control of the church is running things as much as the lords are running things. Who do you think the lords are confessing to? The church, the priests. So the priests know they've got dirt on, you or whatever. They're telling when the Crusades happened, all the lords got on their horses and marched off to destroy Byzantium. Why did they do that? Because the church told them to. The Pope told them to. It was the church that was directing things. So holding it together, Christendom was, everyone was under the Pope in Western Europe. Not everyone was under the same lords. So the church was on the side of that feudal establishment. They had it pretty good. They were getting their tithes. They had, land, they had buildings. So when the French Revolution came about, the French Revolution was like all about, let's get rid of the old landlord rentier system. It's called rentier. It's a French word because the landlords get rents. You live on their land, you cough up rent. So what do they do for a living? They collect rent. And the French Revolution said, well, let's create a different system because rents are actually economically a drain. Let's create a system where rents are reduced or even eliminated. The more we'll create we have the ability to create a system to get rid of that, where people, instead of just sitting around, here's what I do for a living, I just wait for the money to come in. No, let's have a system where everyone can use their gifts to uplift the standards of living. And like I've used the metaphor of pulling the sleigh. Like all the people who are pulling the sleigh, they're working. The more people you've got sitting in the sleigh just getting pulled, that's the rent collecting. So the French Revolution was about, hey, let's get people out of the sleigh and let's just all pull together and we'll all get there faster. And so the right in the French Revolution was, let's not get rid of feudalism. So the landlords and the church were on the right, or the people who collected rents were on the right. The people who wanted to break down feudalism were on the left. Is that what the left stands for today? No. They're all on the side of the oligarchs, because today the oligarchy is basically it's big banks. You pay your mortgage. Now your mortgage is 40% of your income. And you're in the United States, I was paying more for healthcare I was paying more per month for healthcare for a family of 4 than for my mortgage. So now you get a 40% mortgage and a 40% of your paycheck goes to your healthcare. So now 80% of your paycheck is going to basically rents.
Yeah.
To the landlord. And now you get 20%. Oh, wait, no, the other 10% has to go to the credit card. So that goes to the rents.
Yeah.
So basically it's like you're a serf again. We've turned you back into a serf where.
Yeah, it's looped back around.
And Yanis Varoufakis, whom I mentioned earlier, I mentioned him in this video. He uses a lot of myths in his economic explanation. He says basically we've devolved back into feudalism, but it's techno-feudalism, where Google takes a rent and Amazon takes a rent. I'm an author. I sell a book on Amazon. Guess what percentage if you buy one of my books, guess what percentage Amazon gets? 40%. They demand 40%.
40%.
So, yeah, 40%. Now the book costs something to print. So guess what? Amazon gets more per book than I get when you buy one of my books. It's like the landlord again. So anyway, do you hear anybody on either side of the divide talking about this? Barely anybody. Because nobody is saying, let's break down the rent system. Because the banks would have to take a haircut. If I said, the house I grew up in California, when I went off to the Army, I was in the Army for a while, it cost $300,000. nobody in the rest of the country could imagine that a 4-bedroom house was $300,000. It didn't cost that when my parents bought it in 74, but by the time I went off to the military academy in 87, it was $300,000. And everybody was like, that's crazy. What's going on? Well, today, later it went to like $900,000, or, in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, tech, Google, Apple, all these companies are based there. A 4-bedroom house today is like $2 million. Now, who can afford a $2 million house? Like, how many millennials can buy, how many young families? Like, when my parents moved into that house, I was 3 years old. So they were a young family with young kids. And it wasn't a, $2 million house. The point being, if we want to change the system, you don't hear either side saying, okay, what's going to actually have to happen is your house that's worth 2 million is going to have to go back to being about 100,000. Now, the people who own the house are going to say, what?
Yeah.
You can't do that. And the bankers are going to say, what? I'm getting a nice fat mortgage at $2 million. I can get a 3% mortgage. I can give out a 3% mortgage. I'm going to make a heck of a lot more than $100,000, even if I charge 10% mortgage, right? So I want it to be 3 million. And by the way, or 2 million. And the insurance company says, ooh, I'm insuring a $2 million house. That's a pretty nice premium for me. And the realtor says, ooh, I sold a $2 million house. That's a nice, cut for me. So there's all these people that are getting basically rents. If you want to fix the problem, you're going to have to bring the house price down to 1 million. But now the family who owns a house and they were counting on it being sold for 2 million, they're like, I don't want to vote for that policy. Yeah, but it might be the best for everybody because the young generation can't buy houses. What you have to do is say to the people, guess what? If your house is today worth 900,000 and we think it should be, or you bought it when it was 100,000, we're going to bring it back to 100,000. We're going to reset, and the bankers are going to scream, but they can afford it. We're going to actually, we've saved the bankers a million times. They're not going to go out of business, but maybe they won't be driving as many Ferraris as they did before. But we're also going to give you, every single family, when we take your house from 900,000 down to 100,000, when we do this reset, we're going to give you 800,000 right now, and you can stay in the house and still own it. And then when you sell it, you can get 100,000. The government could do that. In other words, you don't have to make everybody scream to fix the system, but the bankers and the insurance agents will scream, and they're the ones who are controlling the politicians. And both sides, but neither side, left or right, is saying, you know what we really have to do? We need to break the power of the banks and the insurance companies. Neither side is saying that. I don't hear any left politicians saying that. Left politicians are saying we need to,
that's not even spoken about at all. It's not even mentioned.
But that's what they should be talking about. So that's how you get rid of the rent problem, or the serfdom problem. That's what the French Revolution and left and right was actually all about. And it was cooking along and then it got derailed. Anyway, that's my big picture of left and right. Sorry, we've used up the whole interview. Do you want to see some slides?
No, don't apologize. This has been so interesting. I'm loving your take on this stuff.
Yeah, I've driven all my followers are like, I don't like that guy anymore after hearing that. No, this is what I think is so important, is getting rid of the vestiges of oligarchy that are turning the people back into serfdom. You don't want serfdom. Serfdom's actually not good. And that's what my whole video that I'm hopefully going to post soon is about. Let me share my screen.
Yeah.
And then you guys have questions. I'm sorry if I derailed it.
Don't worry about it.
That's fine.
That's just what was on my mind. All right, here we go. Am I sharing?
Yeah.
You see it?
Got you.
All right. I tried to replicate your logo. Here's my, here we are on the 8th of February, at least in Australia, it's already the 8th of February. And this is a quotation I love to use. It's from someone named Alvin Boyd Kuhn. And it just sets the stage for what I'm going to briefly try and talk about, probably more briefly now that I I don't know how much time you guys have, but I'll go through, the whole thing and give you time for questions as much as you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take your time. We've got as long as you need.
Right on. So this quotation, he's talking about Bible stories. As you can see, he lived from 1880 to 1963. But this could apply to all the myths. The myths are not a record of what happened to a man or a people as historical occurrence. They're not about historical events. They mean nothing as outward events, in fact, he says, but they mean everything as picturizations, dramatizations. They're picturing, like a movie does, that which is our experience at all times. Like I use the metaphor of the Karate Kid a lot. That's what the myths are. The myths are like Mr. Miyagi using wax on, wax off to teach Daniel-san something that Daniel could not have grasped otherwise. That movie, none of us is going to actually live through the exact experience of Daniel-san because we don't live in 1980s Los Angeles. Nobody can live in 1980s Los Angeles anymore. It's gone. But that movie still can speak to us about overcoming our doubts or whatever. So this is picturing what is our experience, just like a movie does. That's what the myths are doing. They're actually about you. The actors are not old kings, priests, and warriors. The one actor in every portrayal, in every scene, is the human soul. It's about you. It's about spiritual aspects of what's going on inside of you, but it's about your drama inside of you. Those gods and goddesses, they're inside of you. Those 12 disciples, one of them is doubting, one of them is aggressive, one of them is headstrong. You've got that inside of you. And one of them is Jesus. You've got that inside of you. The Bible, just the Buddha is a picture of higher self. Jesus is a picture of higher self. Krishna is a picture of higher self. Athena is a picture of higher self. I'm not saying they're not real. Athena is also a goddess, maybe outside of us as well as inside of us. But anyway, the Bible is the drama of our history here and now. It is not apprehended in its full force. You don't grasp it in its full force and applicability until every reader discerns himself, or I put in herself, to be the central figure in it. You are the star of the myth. I would say you're actually all the characters. You have them all inside because we're multiple personalities. So this, now when I start talking about some myths, let's apply what he just said. So does anyone know what this scene is? Have you guys read a lot of Bible stories in Sunday school?
No.
What's going on in this picture? Can you see what's happening? We've got a king on the left seated in a throne. We've got two women. And then we got this big burly swordsman with a big beard and long hair, arching a sword over his back while holding what in one hand?
Baby.
A baby. Look at that baby. He's
There's another
arching
baby on
really
the ground
vigorously.
too.
And there's actually a dead baby on the ground. So this is called the Judgment of Solomon. You can see there's two pillars there. There's actually a few pillars, but Solomon sits between two pillars. Solomon is renowned for being the what? The strongest? The most ferocious? What is Solomon's claim to fame? You know?
Don't know.
Well, he was the richest too, but mainly he's known for being the wisest king. He was given wisdom. So God asked him, Solomon, ask me for anything. That's a pattern we find in myth around the world. Hey, King Midas, ask me for anything. Oh, I think I want everything to turn to gold. Oh, wrong answer, Midas. Solomon was asked, what do you want? And he said, well, I'm a king and I've got to judge the people, but I feel like a little child. I feel overwhelmed. How am I supposed to judge all these different issues? I ask you for wisdom. And God said, that's the right answer. I like that answer. I will give you wisdom. And right after that, the Bible says, transitions to this story of two women, actually two harlots. The King James says two harlots, which is two prostitutes, two whores, two hookers come to the king. And they say, you know what, king? Me and this other woman, we lived in the same basically apartment. You know, we're prostitutes. And we both conceived at about the same time. And I had a baby. And then 3 days later, or 3 months later, 3 days later, she had a baby 3 days later. So the babies are almost the same age, but there's a 3-day difference between them. And So they're about the same age. Well, this one, she overlaid her baby in the night. She rolled over on it, I think, and suffocated it. It's dead. And then she switched babies with me. And so she gave me her dead baby, and now she has the live baby, and that's my baby, and I want it back. And the other prostitute says, no way, king. That's not true. This is my baby, the live one. She's the one with the dead baby. And the king says, oh my goodness. How am I going to resolve this? Everybody's looking. What's the king going to do? I don't know. Everyone says he's so wise. Let's see if he can figure this one out. And so he says, no, I've got an idea. Let's take the live baby, cut it in half, and give one half to each of you. Problem solved. Swordsman, cut that baby in half. And one woman says, please, king, don't spare the baby. Please just give it to her. I don't care. Just don't cut that baby in half. And the other prostitute says, oh no, I think that's a great idea. Cut it in half. And Solomon says, and here's, the painting. This is by a painter, a famous French painter, James Tissot, 1836 to 1902. This is the point. He's pointing. He says, stop. Don't cut the baby in half. I figured it out. Give it to the one who says, don't cut it in half. Don't give it to the one who says, cut it in half. Obviously, that's not the mother. And everybody says, Solomon's wisdom is unsurpassed. So it's a famous story. Now, it's probably not a literal story because it doesn't make sense for the one woman to say, cut it in half, because a minute ago she was asking for it, right? But maybe in her misery, she's like, yeah, two dead babies. Misery loves company. I'd rather her baby die too.
Yeah.
Like that's a picture of like how we can get taken over by, a part of our personality that we don't like. It's like, oh shit, did I say that? And later she's like, I really didn't want to kill the baby. But anyway, it's not a literal story. It's a celestial story. I'm going to show another painting. Oh, first of all, there's King Solomon, number one. I'll label them quickly for ease of reference. The two women, I put them 2A, 2B. So one woman's obviously pleading for the baby's life, and one woman's like, yeah, go ahead, cut him in half.
Yeah.
Then we got dead baby here and live baby here, just so all viewers can see that. And there's the swordsman. Now I want you to look at the baby is arching vigorously. If you guys have ever changed a baby's diaper, or given a baby a bath, when they're mad, they sometimes arch like this.
Right.
Very interesting that the paintings down through the centuries. Here's a different painter from much earlier, Peter Paul Rubens. This is the same scene. Now, can you see Solomon? He's up there. He's pointing. He's saying, stop, don't cut the baby in half.
Yeah.
Look at the swordsman. Swordsman, similar arch, he's holding his sword over his back like he's about to, I'm going to cut. And he's holding, what's the baby doing? Hard, vigorous arch again. And then we see the dead baby there. Now, one mother has her arm conspicuously out. The other mother kind of has two hands. In this case, she's holding like her dress, like a apron. Anyway, I'm just pointing out these artistic details down through the centuries. And we're going to go back even further. One more. Solomon here between two pillars. He's actually between two pillars on the Peter Paul Rubens. On the throne, there's two pillars kind of carved behind him. But this one is by a famous painter you may have heard of named Raphael. The Teenage Ninja Turtles have a Raphael. And Raphael, he lived back in 1400s and early 1500s. Same arching baby. See how the baby's arching? Same sword over shoulder, heel raised. And then we got one woman with kind of an arm out, gesturing down towards the baby, and one woman with kind of two hands. Now that woman, I just want to point out that mother, she's walking one direction while looking back the other direction. These are celestial clues that I'm going to point out. So can you see how there's like a pattern going on here?
Yeah.
Artistic pattern. So now I'll bring in the stars of the heavens. Can you see them?
Yeah.
And I'm going to start with the swordsman. So I'm throwing you guys in the deep end, but I just want to show the Bible is based on the stars. All these stories are based on the stars. They're esoteric. When you have two babies and two mothers, That's actually esoteric. Like Osiris of ancient Egypt has Isis and Nephthys. And Horus actually has two mothers, and the ancient Egyptian texts say something like Isis bore him, but Nephthys suckled him, nursed him. What's going on with two mothers? What's going on with two babies, one dead, one alive? What's going on with twins all throughout the myths? There's twins in myths everywhere around the world.
Right.
I argue that it's not two different people. The two mothers, you've got the blessing mother and the cursing mother inside of you. One mother is like, no, save the baby. That's a blessing. Like, I want life. So the other mother's like, no, kill him. That's
like
cursing.
the devil and the angel on your shoulder, that type of.
Yep. Exactly. And the dead baby, the first birth is a physical birth. We're born into this physical body. Your physical body is going to die. That's like the dead baby. The second birth is the spiritual birth. That's what's going on here. Is they're telling us something very profound about us. But let me show you that it's celestial. First of all, let me show you it's a metaphor. I'm arguing it's a metaphor. Now I'm going to prove it's a metaphor, because if it's based on the stars, then it's a metaphor. This is the constellation that is commonly known as Hercules.
Yeah.
Hercules is a mythical figure, and he is based on this constellation. I can show that. Figures associated with this constellation usually have a big, full beard, powerful weapon. You can see why. Look at this. The head of the constellation is square. The weapon over is powerful. See that lunging posture? It's very distinctive lunging posture. Why is when I was trying to figure this out, I said, why is the baby always arching? Because right next to Hercules, there's this constellation called the Northern Crown, Corona Borealis. Can you see that right there?
Yeah.
And you can imagine a line going. Hercules isn't normally connected to the Northern Crown, but in myths and in ancient artwork, even going back to ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, there are Hercules figures who are like in that posture, and they're holding something that's arch-shaped. Like Hercules himself will be grasping the arch-shaped crest on the opponent that he's about to kill. It's very distinctive. That is the baby. That's the arching baby. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Your viewers might be saying, well, this is a stretch. Are you kidding? I'm going to show you more evidence. But this figure of a powerful, dude picking up a baby, it is found in myths around the world. And you would not expect, it's unexpected. You wouldn't expect the Northern Crown to be envisioned as a baby. Sometimes it's envisioned as a necklace or a crown or all kinds of things in different myths. To see it as a baby is a pretty creative thing. And yet we find it over and over around the world. So there's some kind of connection going on here. Now I'll show you who Solomon is. Right here is a very important constellation called Ophiuchus. It means the serpent holder. See how it has a center pillar or a center obelisk, and then on either side the serpent?
Yeah.
You might not initially agree, but there's tons of evidence that Solomon is Ophiuchus. And Solomon is the one who builds the temple and sits between the pillars. And Ophiuchus has these two halves to it, but also the central figure kind of has the two pillars. Can you see that? That is actually related to the building of the temple. And I'll show you a little bit more evidence that Ophiuchus is Solomon in a minute. But just trust me, for the time being, Solomon is Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is a figure that is often associated with higher self and with wisdom. And Solomon is associated with wisdom. Now I'm going to show the two mothers. The first mother is probably Virgo. See Virgo right there?
Oh, yeah.
Virgo, see her outstretched arm?
Yeah.
Virgo is actually the mother of like the first birth. Now the two babies in the story, they're born 3 days apart. As the sun is moving through the zodiac, it moves through Virgo, then it moves through Libra, then it moves through Scorpio. I've put those up here. Then it comes to Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the archer. And actually, Sagittarius plays male figures and also female figures. All of the constellations do in the myths. Sometimes they're male, sometimes they're female. This is the second mother. 3 days later, it's actually 3 months later that the sun will get to Sagittarius, but that is the second birth. This has to do with the turning of the seasons, the equinox, the solstice. I saw that you had someone on talking about the origins of Christmas connected to the solstice. That is just, I'm not going to go into the whole system, but that's where the second birth happens. The spiritual birth is at the solstice. It's the turning point. And the sun's going through this turning point right down there. This is the lowest time in the northern hemisphere when the sun is the lowest, and then it turns back around and moves upward. So this is when the birth of the higher self happens. The second birth, the live baby. See, the first birth, the Virgo birth, is the plunge down into this body. Anyway, this is all esoteric. It's a system, and it's talking about not just, oh, I have a soul, it's talking about you actually have a self, a higher self, a wise self. You've got a source of wisdom, but it's been suppressed and buried, and that's what and you've got to get back in touch with it. And the reason it's been buried is because of trauma in this world, and it just happens. And but you can get back in touch with it. It's talking about our condition. So there's actually a second crown right next to Sagittarius. It's almost like down on the floor next to her. That's the southern crown. I had to put the words down there to fit, but can you see the southern crown?
Yeah.
That's the dead baby. But the dead baby has been put next to the second birth mother. See, because they've been switched. And the live baby is being lifted up by Hercules and is about to get cut in half. And then the king says, stop. I was only kidding. Don't cut that baby in half. I just had to figure out who was the right mother. And now, he's so wise. So can you see how this scene, it may not be immediately obvious, but when you look at enough myths, I'm going to show you another celestial figure. This is someone slaying a giant and then cutting off his head. Do you know who it is? It's also Bible. I'm named after him. David and Goliath.
Oh, David and Goliath.
Yes, Goliath. He actually takes the sword of Goliath, the giant sword, and cuts off Goliath's head. Now,
the story,
can you see David is standing on Goliath? He's like got one foot on Goliath, but this is also Peter Paul Rubens, the same painter that we saw in that earlier Solomon one that I took away. Can you see the posture of David there?
Yeah.
Look back at the stars. Can you see any constellations that look like they're in that posture? Sword overhead, deep knee bend.
Pretty much exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty much exactly Hercules. And can you see that he's got his foot on Goliath's temple there? You see right there?
Yeah, exactly.
Goliath is the giant Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is Goliath in this case. And David, that's why David has to cut off his head. Now, if you know the Bible, you know David is also a musician. I think everybody should play music. I've now decided that music is essential. We should all, it's not too late, no matter how old you are, spend some time every day playing music. David's musical instrument was any guesses? It's on a bottle of Guinness. It's celestial. The harp. Here's a picture of David playing the harp. Can you see that he's in that? The painter, this is a painter who died in 1724. I didn't put his dates up because I don't know when he was born. Nobody knows when he was born, but his name was Giacomo del Po, the river Po in Italy. But can you see how this painter has also put his legs almost in the same Hercules posture again? But he's playing the harp. Now, right next to Hercules on the other side from the northern crown is David's harp. That's Lyra the lyre. So David plays a lyre or a harp. Hermes or Mercury in ancient Greece invented the harp. It's the reason David plays the harp is David is associated with Hercules. He plays the lyre. He slays Goliath. And Solomon is, do you know the relationship between David and Solomon by any chance?
No.
One is the father of the other. David is the father of Solomon.
Right.
So Solomon, remember which constellation I said Solomon is? Also Ophiuchus. He's Ophiuchus. Solomon is descended from David, i.e. Solomon's father.
Yeah.
You see how if Ophiuchus is Solomon, he's descended from David? like he's directly below
Mm.
Hercules. So this happens in the myths a lot, where a figure will be descended from another constellation. Or does that make sense what I just said?
Yeah.
It's another clue that what I said about Solomon being Ophiuchus is true. Anyway, I'm showing you this using some biblical stories. There's other Bible stories. There's one where David is up on the roof and he sees a beautiful maiden. He looks down in his garden at night and sees a beautiful Bathsheba. He's standing on the roof. Now, if I told you that David was Hercules, can you see why he's standing on a roof? Look at Ophiuchus.
Yeah, because it's triangle.
Yeah, it looks like a house. Like when a kid
Yeah.
draws a house, they draw a rectangle and then they put a little triangle on top.
Yeah.
David is up on the roof. You see?
Yeah.
And he looks down and sees a beautiful maiden. He's either looking down and seeing Virgo or Sagittarius. I vote for Sagittarius because she's right next to the Milky Way. That's where she's taking a bath. And she's usually she's often a very beautiful maiden, Sagittarius. She's down on the left. She's a bit covered up there. She's not always a female figure. I'm going to show you a myth where she's a male figure. So now this is a worldwide system. I'll take away the Bible pictures and see if you're familiar with this figure. This is a figure. If I showed some Bollywood movies of this figure, he has a big mustache, got big burly arms, carries a big club, and he's in this posture. I'm going to outline. This is from a temple in Halabid, I think it's pronounced, the Hoysaleshwar temple. It's an amazing temple. People can't figure out how this temple was made. It looks like it was, using advanced machining techniques, but it was built in the 1100s. It's a mysterious temple, has these incredible carvings. But I want to call attention to this figure right here. He's fighting a bunch of elephants. This is a figure who fights in the Mahabharata, Duryodhan. Do you know Duryodhan?
No.
Okay. You can look up online. There's YouTube videos of Mahabharata. There's tons of kind of like in the 50s, there were a lot of movies about Jason and the Argonauts and Hercules out of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Well, there's also lots of movies about Mahabharata, the Pandava brothers. There's these 5 heroic brothers, and one of them is super strong like Hercules. And he's in this posture. Can you see the posture?
Yeah.
And look at Hercules. Can you see that's exactly Hercules?
Yeah. That's the first thing I saw, yeah.
There's a hero whose name is Beam. There's 5 Pandava brothers. There's the oldest brother, Yudhisthira, who's the wisest, and he gets to be the kind of the king. Then there's Beam. He's super strong.
Yeah.
And then there's Arjun. Have you heard of Arjun or Arjuna? He has a bow. Anyway, and then there's 2 twins, Nakula and Sahadev. And so there's 5 heroic brothers. And then they go through all these adventures. Well, Beam has a mace, and he is in this posture, and he fights Duryodhan, and then he kills a bunch of elephants. That's what's being depicted here. Duryodhan is like the bad guy. And you can see it's Hercules posture, hopefully.
Yeah.
Really Hercules posture. And here's another. This is actually called the Beam Gate, or the Bhima Gate. This is from the 1500s. It's also Beam. Look at the posture.
Yeah, the knees exactly like Hercules.
Yeah, and the mace, that's like a mace that he's carrying. It looks like kind of like a torch, but that's Beam. And he's even got actually a sash that sticks out behind his butt there that points to the star Vega in Lyra. You see that in Hercules has usually the tail of like his leopard skin or his lion skin.
Yeah.
The other clue here is if you look at the picture of Beam on the Bhima Gate there, he's holding a mace in one hand. Can you see what he's holding in his other hand? Right there. He's plucked a lotus flower. Now, why would a Hercules figure pluck a lotus flower? Look over here. Can you see Ophiuchus? You see the serpent half of Ophiuchus? You see that's the serpent half that usually is seen as the serpent head. Can you see how that could be a lotus growing out of Ophiuchus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
and Hercules is reaching down to pluck it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the Pandava brothers, there's five of them. Bhima is the strongest. Yudhisthira is the wisest, so he's Ophiuchus, I argue. And also Yudhisthira's weapon is a spear, and Ophiuchus figures usually have a spear because of those two serpent halves. You could draw a line through them that's more straight, and it would look like a spear. So Ophiuchus is Yudhisthira in the Mahabharata, and Arjun, who's kind of the most famous of the five Pandava brothers, he's the best at weapons. Like, he's not the strongest. Beam picks up trees sometimes and uses them as a club. Arjun goes up to the gods and gets all these celestial weapons, including a bow that's so powerful. And he does this. He does a famous bow trick, just like Odysseus does in the Odyssey, where he shoots a bow through the eye of a fish and a spinning disc to win. All these five brothers have one wife whose name is Drupadi. She's the most beautiful princess. Five brothers, one wife. In the Bible stories, Jesus comes across a woman who has five husbands. So this is like a universal pattern. These are connections. I'm not saying that they both got it from each other. I think they came from some very ancient civilization. But this is a picture of Arjun. You can see his weapon or his primary weapon is a bow. Can you see it in the picture?
Yeah.
Here's another one. Arjun is in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is talking to Arjun before the great battle in Mahabharata of Kurukshetra, the battle of Kurukshetra. Arjun, who's the most weapon proficient, he's got all the weapons he needs to do this battle, is filled with doubts, and he gets out of the chariot, sits down in the dust and says, I don't think I can go through with it. And Krishna, who's his charioteer, the divine charioteer, says, Arjun, let me tell you the Bhagavad Gita. That's the Bhagavad Gita is the song of Krishna speaking to Arjun. He says, you have to do what's right without attachment. Arjun is sitting down in the dust. Krishna is actually associated with Ophiuchus as well, the wisdom, the higher self. Arjun has gotten down in the dust outside of the chariot, and he's carrying his bow. Can you see? He's on the left in that little picture. He's got the bow, and Krishna is in the front. He's the charioteer. So who's got a bow? That's Sagittarius. So Arjun is Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, sometimes male figures, sometimes female figures. Like the goddess Artemis, she carries a bow. She's Sagittarius, but her twin brother Apollo, who also carries a bow, he's also Sagittarius, I believe. Anyway, I'm just showing that this is around the world. And in fact, the chariot, Ophiuchus, all their chariots, you see how the war carts in the ancient Indian epics have these little umbrellas on top of them?
Yeah.
Little canopy. That's Ophiuchus. See, Ophiuchus has a little triangular roof.
Right. Yeah.
Is actually hooked up to, if you follow what I've labeled Lotus, right in front of Lotus, there's a sitting figure. That's like the charioteer who's pulling the chariot. So Ophiuchus could be a chariot that's being pulled by the horses of the Big Dipper, the four horses that are hitched up in the front, the white horses. I'm not expecting everyone to see this all at once, but the evidence is actually overwhelming that this is going on. Let me see if I have any other pictures. Oh yeah, Krishna. So Krishna is talking to Arjun. Ophiuchus is both the chariot and Krishna. So Krishna, there's a very famous story where Krishna dances on the head of the Kaliya Nag. It's called the Nagas are these serpent deities that live in the water. Well, I am quite confident that they are associated with Scorpio. So look down at Scorpio in the stars.
Yeah.
Scorpio's halfway in the Milky Way.
Yeah.
He's like a serpent that lives in the river. And Scorpio actually has multiple heads, or it looks like it has multiple heads.
Yeah.
Like Hercules fights the Hydra, which has 9 heads. So often Krishna will be dancing on a Kaliya Nag that has multiple heads. In this particular painting, there's only one head, but I like it because he's holding his flute. You see the flute? Can you see it? I don't know if we're in the way on my...
Yeah, I can see it on mine. I've moved us
Are we in the way, or can you see it? Let me...
Yeah, I moved us out of the way on mine.
Oh, yeah, okay. So hopefully on your end where it's recording, we're out of the way, right?
Yeah, he will be.
Good, good, good. So you can see how Krishna, see how he's holding a flute out to one side and he's standing on a serpent, sometimes a multi-headed serpent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now look at Ophiuchus standing on top of Scorpio.
Yeah.
Mm.
Can you see, do you see a flute off to one side
Yeah.
anywhere?
On the left, yeah.
That's like Krishna is, well, he's actually an avatar of Vishnu. Vishnu is also Ophiuchus. Vishnu has a lotus growing out of his belly button, out of his navel. And when he's dreaming the universe into existence, Vishnu is actually reclining on the back of a different serpent, Sheshanag, with a lotus coming out of his belly button. So Vishnu is also Ophiuchus, and the lotus is coming out of his belly button, and he's reclining on the back of Scorpio. But in this case, Krishna, who's an avatar of Vishnu, is also Ophiuchus, and he's dancing on the head of the multi-headed Scorpio. See that?
Mm.
Yeah.
Is this convincing, or is this like, no, this is too much?
No, this is
stretch.
With the Hindu gods in particular, and the stories of the Hindu gods. I think you've linked it, but I think going from the Hercules side and the biblical times stories to then linking it to this gives it like ultimate sort of connections.
Yeah, I think it's just too similar to the pictures for it not to be based on the stars. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the artwork, the ancient, we could go to ancient Egypt. We could go to ancient Mesopotamia, and this same pattern can be found in the artwork. Now, some people might complain and say, oh, well, that doesn't prove anything. It's just the artists. But we can actually, the Bible didn't come full of pictures. We can actually use the text as well. Like in the Bible, it says, he will step on the head of the serpent, but the serpent will bite his heel. Well, we can see that's talking about Ophiuchus and Scorpio.
Yes.
It's just not as visual. I could have just put up a bunch of texts on here and shown you the connections, but that's just not as satisfying. So I agree. The artwork really nails it.
It's like just the small things that make it more convincing, like the way the knees are bent on Hercules and Bhima.
Yeah.
The flute pointing left, and the flute also pointing left in the artwork.
Yeah. Oh, I've got another one where the flute is pointing left. I found, let me see. Oh, yeah. The Scorpio, that's how you spell the name of the Kalia Nog. So I put Kalia down there next to Scorpio. Let me show one other picture. This one's a little more modern, I think. I don't know. But can you see there's the flute off to the left? Yeah. It's really interesting. Oh, but there's Bible passages where it talks about an angel with 1 foot in the sea and 1 foot on land blowing a trumpet. Well, that's Ophiuchus again. Can you see how Ophiuchus has 1 foot in the Milky Way and 1 foot not on the Milky Way?
Yeah.
So you could use the text as well. I'm just mentioning that for any potential critics out there who are going to say, oh, well, this doesn't prove that the Bible was based on the stars because it's just a bunch of artwork. Well, this is part of an ancient worldwide system. It predates the most ancient Egyptian texts and art. It predates the most ancient Mesopotamian texts and art. It predates the Vedas, because the Vedas, which are very ancient, they're talking about gods and goddesses who are based on the stars. They're doing these actions that can be shown to connect up to the stars. So what's it all about? I'll just finish up with, as we kind of had this big long intro, and I'll let you guys ask questions, but I believe that on the individual level, as I was hinting at with the Solomon story, it's talking about reconnecting with higher self. There's these cutting edge psychologists today who are they're talking about psychological trauma as being a separation from self, an alienation from self. And on the societal level, opposing oligarchy, because oligarchy leads towards more alienation, more trauma. Like if a family has to work 3 jobs in order to just pay the rent and the credit card and the student debt in the healthcare or whatever, then how much time is that mom and dad going to have to watch that child when it's a baby? They're going to have to put them in childcare somewhere. And who knows, what kinds of disconnections that child's going to have because they're never with their mom and their dad. The more economic oligarchy you have, the more childhood trauma you're going to have, and the more people are going to be alienated from themselves. And guess what? If you're alienated from yourself, how equipped are you to overthrow oligarchy or oppose oligarchy or put down oligarchs? It's like, let's keep you traumatized, because like a well-connected, grounded, man or woman who's really in touch with who they are is going to say, you know what, this system, this isn't right. This isn't good. What's going on? I don't like that. I don't think anybody else agrees this is good. Hey, let's make some changes around here.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a healthy, connected populace if you're an oligarch. You want to have an unhealthy, disconnected, traumatized populace.
Yeah, who are busy.
So,
the minds are busy. The minds are preoccupied on something else.
Yes, exactly. And so I think we're living through that right now, and we're so busy trying to get back in touch with ourselves. Like, that's important. We got to get back in touch with ourselves. But if that's all we have time to focus on, then the oligarchs are just going to say, well, this is great. Let me turn up the oligarch dial from 10 to 11 now.
So how have you found your research? How has it been perceived by religious scholars or studying mythologies?
Yeah, good question, Aaron. So I have I've been churning along in my lonely path of throwing it out there. I have sent off scholarly articles. I've got a master's degree and I taught at the military academy, and I know how to write a scholarly article. There was a very interesting agate that was uncovered called the Pylos combat agate. It's got these beautiful artwork on it. It's tiny. Nobody can figure out how they etched in this incredible artwork on the Pylos agate. And there's a Hercules figure, and he's grasping a crest on another warrior. And as soon as I saw it, I said, oh, celestial. And I wrote a big, long academic paper. And I sent it off to a few academic journals and professors of art history. You would think that a professor of art history might be interested in what I just showed you. Crickets. And when I say crickets, it means like total silence, and you can hear the crickets out in the darkness of the night. Is crickets. So the scholarly response, so sad, very sad. There's a podcaster named Esoteric in London, from England, and he passed away about a year ago. Mysterious. I just got the word that he passed away. I've been on his show a few times. He reached out to me. Wonderful gentleman. Had me on his show several times. And we also had lots of conversations offline as well. And I don't know exactly what happened to Esoteric, but he invited me on with a religious scholar who was actually interested in connections between the Odyssey of ancient Greece and the Bible. And so he had us on, and you can watch those quote unquote debates. They're not really a debate, but he's like, this scholar was unfortunately a bit dismissive of my, he was like, well, this is very clever. And, I guess anybody could see pictures in the stars, but it doesn't, it's like, well, look, he gave me some positive feedback to where he said, look, if you're going to break into the academic community, you have to address every possible argument. But, I didn't feel like he was really he was pretty unaccepting and defend, and that's been kind of the way it's just been kind of brushed off and dismissed. And eventually Esoteric and I did a follow-on conversation to that, because I didn't get through all the slides. I wish I could have shown him all the evidence, but he kept kind of detouring a little bit, so we didn't get to see all the evidence that I had prepared to show him. So we did our own show just showing. So you can find those two podcasts out there on the Esoteric podcast channel. which is still going. But sadly, esoteric has left us. But yeah, it's a good question. So far, I thought, oh, this is going to be, everyone's going to be so excited to learn this. But no, and the academic community, let's face it, is not ready to admit that there were cultures more ancient than ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia that may have been more advanced. Which it's pretty clear there was.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the biggest thing that's holding you back from getting recognition and from an academic perspective?
Yeah.
And then open to this idea of having older societies.
Look, I think academia has been fairly well captured by the oligarchs as well. Like, if you want to run an oligarchy, you better control the media, which is a thought forming institution or a thought forming organ, right? The media. Well, you better control the other thought forming organs of your society as well, including the education system. So if I want to question I don't know if we want to go there, but well, we should. I mean, the slaughter that's going on in Palestine right now, I would argue, is an ethnic cleansing, a war crime. I know you've had someone on your show that disagrees with me. All American politicians are basically lapdogs for Israel, and even RFK, left or right. That's right. And so are American universities have generally been completely blind to the criminal apartheid state of Israel since its founding. Now, all of a sudden, the mask is dropping, and it's being people are turning in the universities, but universities are still, in general, afraid to attack Israel. Okay, so if Israel is founded on the idea that, well, that land belongs to everyone who's descended from Abraham and Moses, and I'm saying, well, all those characters are myths. All those characters, nobody's descended from a constellation. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is actually a revolutionary subject. Okay, and if the universities are basically lapdogs for the oligarchical status quo, like, universities can question gender. Is that going to overthrow the status quo? Is that going to change your mortgage? What a university says about gender and pronouns? No. But universities can be as brave as they want about some subjects, but they're not going to. They're not in the business of overthrowing the established order, or they're not going to get funding. And I guess going to get a grant. So I don't know.
I guess what your research does is it debunks like organized religion, right? Like Christianity, for example, it debunks it in the sense Jesus wasn't real; is a myth.
Well, yeah,
it sort of relates it all the way back to the beginning of the podcast when you spoke about the church and the control that the church has. Yeah. If you're debunking Christianity, then you're debunking the church.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be. See, I'm not saying the stories aren't true. I'm saying they're not literal history. They're telling you truths. So Christianity could say, you know what? It's clearly based on the stars. It's esoteric. It's got a powerful message for you. You came here looking for this message. The message is you've got to get back in touch with yourself. That's what that's your deepest need. And I'm here to help you with that in any way that I can. Oh, that would be a positive message. So they don't have to teach that it's literal. But teaching that it's literal enables you to say, well, I've got the truth and nobody else does. I'm right, they're wrong. It's twisting the message. It turns it upside down. I don't care if it's literalist Christianity or literalist Hinduism. You can use literalist Hinduism to be right-wing and oligarchical. In fact, I would say Modi is a right-wing kind of Trump-like figure in
Mhm.
India who's aggressively literalist Hindu and says you can't be Muslim in India.
Mm.
What? Why not? That's not
Mm.
right. I'm against literalist exclusion of anybody. I
Yeah.
think everybody's got infinite worth as an individual, and I don't care if you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, pagan. These are all different like movies to teach you about yourself. You don't like Tarantino movies? Okay. Well, how about using Disney movies? They're also telling you about your higher self. It doesn't matter. You don't like the stories of the Buddha? Okay. Well, I've got the stories of Krishna and Arjun and Vishnu. Those are telling you the same thing. Oh, those don't appeal to you? Okay. You don't get it from that. How about the Jesus story? How about the story of Joseph in the Old Testament and his 12 brothers who put him down in a pit? It's the same story. They're telling you the same thing. So the problem is the literalism. The problem is not which set of stories you're talking about. So
Yeah.
it's not that I'm against Christianity. I'm against literalist
Mm.
misinterpretation of these stories of any sort. We could be reactionary right wing Japanese myth and act like a mafia and kill people who don't take those literally. That'd be just as wrong. You see what I mean?
Well, it goes to, there's that saying, I don't know the full saying, but it's forget who the messenger is. Did you get the message?
Mm,
That's
that's right.
practically what it is. There's many different books that are writing the same message. So it doesn't
That's
matter
right.
what book you're reading to gain insight of the message. How are
That's
you
right.
actually understanding what the message is? Not who wrote
Yeah.
the message.
Yeah. I'm drinking this coffee and I don't care if it's in a pink mug, a blue mug, or a silver Yeti. I'm after the coffee.
Yeah.
I'm after not the container. I'm
Yeah.
after
What's inside it? Mm.
yeah. So, but yeah, I don't know. Look, I don't know that there's any organized resistance in universities to get back to the original question. Universities are doing their thing and breaking in with a totally new idea. It's like quantum physics. It's like somebody who understands quantum physics going to the physics department in 1903 of any university and saying, well, an electron can be in two places at once. And all the physics teachers go, what the hell are you
Yeah.
talking about?
It's
What?
exactly that. Yeah, what you're saying. They need to accept the first step before they can take the second step. They need to appreciate the first step. I've got a question relating to what you've put together, and I just want to say your slideshow presentation made it like very easy to digest. So you've done a good job in
Thanks.
presenting it. When you say, well, when we look at multiple different books, as we were just saying, and they've all got the same, if not very similar messages. What do you think that came from? And there's no, you're not going to have an exact answer, but what's your theory on? Did it come from like the Atlantis thing, sort of theory, where that was a much sort of more connected um, group of people that then dispersed around the globe? Or do you think they all read the stars in the same way throughout the globe? Or what's your theory on how this sort of got around the globe, how this information traveled around the globe, then got repackaged and then sent out?
Great question. And as you hinted in your question, anyone who tells you they know the answer is full of it. Full of it. I don't know. I have the theory to me that makes the most sense,
Yeah.
that I believe the preponderance of the evidence supports, is that there was a catastrophe on this planet, that maybe we've had many catastrophes down through the millennia, but there was definitely a catastrophe. And there's the whole comet research group that have, since about 2000, really been bringing forth a lot of evidence for a Younger Dryas era catastrophe. There's a black mat of burnt vegetation at a certain layer across vast. There's a die-off of these megafauna like the giant sloths and the saber-toothed tigers and the woolly mammoths. And it's quite evident that there was something way more ancient than Egypt, like Göbekli Tepe, these things that are being found in Turkey that are so ancient. They're like 10,000 BC. So if the Egyptians were 3,000 BC, that's like 7,000 years before the Egyptians. Well, the Egyptians are only 6,000 years before us. So it's like this is more ancient to the Egyptians than the earliest Egyptians are to us today. I mean, they're only 5,000 years ago, really. 3,000 BC is only 5,000 or so years ago.
Yeah.
So if we had advanced capabilities prior to this catastrophe, then what we call the ancient peoples, ancient India, ancient Sumer, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, that we could call that the near ancient. I coined the term the near ancient because they're on our side of the catastrophe. They had a legacy that had somehow survived through this catastrophe. They were trying to piece it together, but this catastrophe, from before the catastrophe, they may not even have known what these myths were for, because I think these myths come from someone way before. And that's all this evidence of extremely advanced machining in Egypt that people like Ben from Uncharted X are showing, and the Serpent Brothers podcast are showing. And I mentioned that temple in India where I showed that picture. That temple in India has pillars that are obviously turned on a lathe. And nobody can figure out how did they have a lathe in 1100. And some of these artifacts from ancient Egypt with the stone walls are so thin and they're so perfectly, you can do CAD scanning of them and find the perfect, geometries of them, is incredible. It is from some culture that's before Egypt, and the Egyptians just, found these vases and said, these are pretty cool. Let's put some hieroglyphics on them and say that they're ours, kind of thing. There was some culture before the catastrophe. The catastrophe was, so I call that the deep ancient, and nobody knows. Before the catastrophe, it may have been extremely advanced, because some of these artifacts in India and Egypt and in the Americas, like Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman, and these megalithic constructions that are extremely precisely machined, and they're worldwide, and they all have the same ratios. I think it was a connected worldwide civilization. And then we had this catastrophe, and basically it's like a puzzle that got scattered. And now some cultures have this piece, and some cultures have this piece, and some cultures have this. It used to be one big puzzle. And so I don't think they all just popped up independently. I think they're part of some connected whole, because remember I showed you the baby being held by the swordsman?
Yeah.
That is an obscure, weird way to envision Corona Borealis as a baby. You wouldn't expect, if one culture came up with that, you wouldn't expect another culture all the way on the other side of the globe to independently say, well, you know what? That kind of looks like a swordsman holding a baby. First of all, Hercules is a hard constellation to even find. And the corona it's easy to find, but it looks like a crown. I could imagine that. It looks like a necklace. I can imagine that. I would not in 100 years think, oh yeah, it's kind of like a baby arching. And yet we find that around the world. Baby Maui, when he gets picked up by his grandfather out of the sea foam, gets hung up in the rafters over the fire to dry. What is that? That's Hercules picking up the baby, and the Milky Way is the smoke from the fire. So it's, did the Polynesian culture also independently come up with it as just like the Bible did? No, whoever wrote the Solomon story or wherever that came from, I think they're part of some ancient system that got obliterated around, 13,000 years ago or so by some catastrophe, potentially a comet plus a solar flare, and humanity had to literally live underground. And then generations later, maybe it was even the surface of the earth might have been radioactive because of a solar flare or something. And then when they came out, they had these stories and they pieced them together. And some people created ancient Egypt and some people created ancient India. And they may not have even known what the original system was for, but they knew more about it than we do today, because now we've had a second, I call it the second catastrophe, when literalist Christianity basically came in and said, oh, you know, the ancients who had it, they were honoring it. They were saying, this is precious. These myths are great. Let's build our civilization around these myths. India, Greece, Roman Empire, Roman gods, Norse myths. They said, this is wisdom. And the people before us, they knew more than we did. You know, they have traditions of everything was better at one time in the past. Then Christianity comes along and says, get rid of that ancient wisdom, squash it. And then they go around the world starting to squash it and destroy the ancient wisdom and teach literalism and say, if you don't believe in Jesus as a flesh and blood person, then you're wrong, because my stories are true and yours are just myths. What? I can show you this should unite everybody instead of dividing everybody. So we've had a second catastrophe, which is still going on, which suppresses the ancient wisdom and denies the existence of the deep ancient time. You go into a university and say, I think there was a civilization that could do advanced machining prior to ancient Egypt. They'll say, there's the door. Go through it. Don't let it hit you on the way out.
We are very close. For example, with the Roman Empire, we are very close. That if it is on the grand scale that we seem to think it's on, and say between the time when way back before the catastrophes, where the original ancient civilizations existed, when they were all connected, up to even like up to now, and then if you go that much further ahead in the future would still categorize us as the Roman Empire. We would all be one big sort of part of time, because we're still living from what happened, what the Romans put down and stated. We're still living like that right now. But when you go and talk to someone, maybe in the educational system, they would probably say how different we are to the Roman Empire and how disconnected from the Roman Empire we are. But in reality, we are still living that, just with we just call our leaders different names.
Yeah, and the political side of it is really interesting, because the ancients, they were against oligarchy. They were okay with monarchy and they were okay with democracy, but they were against oligarchy. And I show that in this video that I'm going to take a look at and try and post here. But basically what we have today is oligarchy.
Yeah.
And getting rid of the ancient wisdom is almost like a project. If you want to have oligarchy, see, the ancient wisdom says, don't use debt to take away everybody's land. The Bible even says that. You know, you have a debt jubilee. Have the debt jubilee every 50 years and give everybody, you know, their land back. And the way it's being used today is basically against the ancient system. The ancient system had to be obliterated, and now, oh, it's just myth. Oh, it's just blah blah. No, that's the pattern that works, and that prevents trauma and trauma and separation from self. The reason it's on the rise is because oligarchy has, you know, if oligarchy was at 5 on the dial, it's at, and 10 is the max. We're pretty much at 11.
Yeah. So do you think Jesus was an actual person that, this is just something that I'm thinking of at the moment, since we've had this conversation today, Jesus could possibly be a person that the Romans used as a bit of people often call him a con man, so I'm going to use that term now. But the Romans could have used this guy as a con man to sway everyone into Christianity quite easily.
Right. So I don't see any evidence for a literal flesh and blood Jesus whatsoever. And I talk about that in a few of my videos and also in my recent book. If you read the letters of Paul, or the person calling himself Paul. Paul is almost like an esoteric mystery name, kind of like when people, if I go join, I don't know, an ashram somewhere, I might be given a new name as an initiate, right? I might be called, I don't know what, some name that means something spiritual, right? Mm. Well, actually, we all have names generally that mean something spiritual. I just showed you I'm named after David, who's a figure that we looked at some pictures of him. But I might be given a new name. Well, Paul in the Bible stories used to be called Saul. Then he got his name changed to Paul. Saul is like solar. These are celestial names. Saul is like the sun, and Paul is also like the sun. Like you may have heard of a god named Apollo. And there's actually a book in the Bible that they used to think was written by Paul, and now scholars say, oh no, we think it was written by someone named Apollos. Well, what are you talking about? So Paul was a Gnostic teacher, and I believe his letters were actually co-opted by the literalist church. But if you read his letters, he says, what are you talking about, flesh and blood Jesus? Didn't I just come there and tell you about this is all spiritual stories. I'm telling you spiritual about something that's in you, the Christ within, that's your higher self. I'm telling you about a spiritual truth, and now you're talking to me about a flesh and blood? Jesus, who has tricked you since I was there? In his letters, he says things like this. He says, this is the mystery of the ages that, I got stoned or I got attacked for teaching these things. These are secret teachings. And there's people who want to kill me because I'm teaching them. This is about your higher self in you. And now you've got people coming behind me and telling you it's all about some flesh and blood Jesus. They're wrong. Where did you go wrong? Didn't I tell you clearly? And he says, there's going to be people who come after me who might even make letters forged in my name. Like he was aware of that. So Paul's letters argue pretty strongly that there was no flesh and blood Jesus. And I would say if there was a flesh and blood Jesus, you can't use the Bible stories to prove him. You better find all your evidence from somewhere other than the Bible stories, because guess what? They're celestial. Jesus and the 12 disciples, what do you think that is? It's the zodiac signs and Ophiuchus. So the 12 disciples, just like the 12 children of Israel, tribes, the groupings, that's the 12 groupings of stars that we call the zodiac. So Jesus and the 12 disciples stories, if you want to prove the existence of a Jesus, you can't use those. Now, you also hinted at the theory that, well, wait, but maybe the Romans created Christianity in order to like lull the people to sleep. So Joseph Atwill talks about that. There's a researcher named Joseph Atwill, and I believe he is correct in some of the arguments that he makes, but he doesn't go far enough. He's correct in pointing out that the letters of Josephus, so there's this important historian named Josephus who gave us, in particular, two really important books. Yes, Atwill is right. Josephus is an important figure to study, and Josephus is a con man. Did you say con man? Yeah, Josephus is a con man. But if he created a Jesus story, why did we do it in 4 gospels? Why do you need 4? Why do you need all this other stuff? So no, the theory that the Jesus stories are just there to make people stupid and compliant, I would argue, I can show you, no, they're actually about something you really need. They wouldn't have this kind of traction still today if they were just only that.
Right. Yeah.
You see, people who are going to church or reading the Bible and saying, wait a minute, there's something in here that speaks to me, they're not wrong. This is what I have to emphasize. They're looking for something. They're looking for the same thing we're all looking for.
Yeah.
Reconnection with self. If you're alienated from your own self, how miserable is that? It sucks. And we all know it sucks because we're all in that condition, basically,
Yeah.
for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're looking for yourself. And guess what? These stories are about finding yourself. So if you're going to the Bible and saying, there's something in here that's really profound and it's speaking to me, and I think I need it, well, you're right.
Yeah.
It's not wrong. And so we wouldn't still be attracted to those stories if they were just bullshit con job. Jesus is a picture of your higher self who's been suppressed, like stuffed down into a tomb. But guess what? Your higher self, yourself, your divine self, that part of you that's more than what the world tells you that you are, that's more than the material part, it's indestructible. No matter what trauma you've gone through, it's indestructible. That's why Jesus gets put up on a cross, beaten, flogged, crown of thorns, whipped, crucified, put in a tomb. There's other gods and goddesses that happens to. Osiris gets cut up into 14 pieces, sent down into the underworld, mummified, and he comes back. Inanna in Mesopotamia goes down into the underworld, humiliated, stripped of all her clothing, stripped of all her jewelry, and she comes back. That's a picture of higher self. And when you see that, it's like you're seeing truth. When you see, it's like a movie that really speaks to you. You see it and you go, wait a minute, there's something profound in here that speaks to my condition. That's what these stories are about. I don't believe it's a con artist, but I also don't believe it's a flesh and blood. It's like saying, do you think Hercules was a flesh and blood guy and then they just made some myths about him? I don't know, maybe, but if you can't use the myths about Hercules to prove the existence of a real Hercules. And who cares? If there was a literal Hercules at some point long ago who was really strong, how does that help my life? I'm not super strong. I can't bench press an elephant. So if some guy could one day in the past, how does that help me live? But the stories about Hercules, if they're about recovering my higher self, and by the way, how many labors does Hercules have? Oh, the 12 labors of Hercules is like the 12 disciples of Jesus. It's this. If that story is about you actually have more power than you think you have, and you actually have a higher self who you can get in touch with and who's capable of helping you through this life by having clarity and wisdom like Solomon in that story, then that actually helps me. If there was some literal Solomon 3,000, 4,000 years ago who was super wise, well, good for him. But how does that help Aaron in his life? How does that help Cam in his life? How does that help Dave? But if that's a picture of your higher self that actually has the clarity. If you can get in touch with higher self, you can know what to do in every situation. Whoa. Or you can at least have more clarity in every situation. You can have this, I don't know, but it just came to me, that divine insight. Where does that come from? It comes through your higher self. And the myths are trying to tell you, not only does higher self exist, but you've buried it. You've suppressed it.
Yeah.
And here's your situation. We've got to help you. And so people are attracted to that because it's teaching truths, not because it's literally historically true. No, it's true on a deeper level than that. Don't get caught up in the history part. That's what Paul keeps saying. What are you talking to me about a flesh and blood Jesus for? I don't care about that. I'm talking to you about something more important.
It's literally irrelevant. Have you read a book called, I'm going to guess you have, but have you read a book called Conversations with God?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
It's basically written from the point of view of someone who is basically asking God, like, what are you? And God, throughout the whole book, it's just a conversation, so it's a back and forth. Throughout the whole conversation, God's basically saying that I am you. Basically, that's the whole thing. So, but every situation, every normal sort of life reality situation that we all see ourselves in, he raises that question and he's like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? And every response brings it back to himself, being in connection with himself, doing the best thing for himself. And it's and I've read parts of the Bible. I've not read all of the Bible, but I've never really been a religious person ever. But when I read this book, I wouldn't say it made me religious in any way, but it sort of showed me that exactly everything that you're saying about finding a higher purpose, connecting with yourself, that proved all of it to me just through reading it. And it's sort of like just from reading that one book, I think it's in 3 parts and I've only read part one, but it just something just clicked in my head and I was like, okay, it all actually makes sense now. All of them questions that I did have around religion, what religion, I don't know which religion to choose, why have I even got to choose a religion? You don't need any of that. It's all irrelevant, basically. You just need to connect with yourself and you need to find it within yourself. Once you have that connection, you feel that fulfillment straight away.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, it must be speaking to people because it's, a lot of people have obviously, I've heard of it. It's obviously a very popular book and I haven't read it, but I'm not discounting also, I think it's important to say the existence of a God outside of me. There's another quotation from Alvin Boyd Kuhn who says the ancient systems with all their gods didn't discount a single creator God, but they had the good sense to leave it alone and be quiet about it because what they say is don't spend all this time grasping for this God outside of you and neglect the part of God that is given to you to know, which is right there inside of you. Like that's the part that you can know. Now, and also I believe that the gods and goddesses, like having multiple is informative because we have multiple. I have multiple parts of who I am.
Yeah.
And I have a higher self. And there's a psychologist named Dr. Richard Schwartz who has discovered this in dealing with thousands of patients. We have different parts where are very real, and yet deep down below all of them is this part that's not a part, it's self. And that's self. And that self is what I'm saying that the myths are showing us, but the myths are also showing us all these other parts that are often at war with the self and suppress the self. And then they say, self, what self? Well, I didn't bury any self. Nope. Didn't happen. There was no trauma. Because it's a defense mechanism. They don't want, it's so painful. What made you suppress yourself was so painful. You don't even want to revisit it. Those parts that buried it don't want to revisit it. But that self can connect to something that's outside of us, that's even bigger. Like there are inexplicable things where a mother wakes up in the middle of the night. I've talked about this in a different book called Myth and Trauma. During the Vietnam War, there were several examples of a mother wakes up in the middle of the night and she feels something terrible has happened. And the next day, the army contacts her. I'm sorry, your son who was in Vietnam died. Well, how did she know that beforehand? There is something beyond us. Are there gods and goddesses and a creator God out there? Yes, probably. I think there is an invisible realm, but mostly we're supposed to be focusing on recovering self, because when we connect with self, that's when we are open to and that self is divine. So it is like the God in you. I haven't read the book, so I can't speak to it, but if it's if it's describing what is true about us, then of course it's going to resonate with people. And the myths resonate with people because they're describing what's true within us. And the Bible resonates with so many people because it's describing what's in us. And the Bhagavad Gita is just describing it in a different way. And it resonates with millions of people and they see it as informing their life. These myths are depicting our inner landscape very accurately, not literally about historical figures, but they're talking about what's actually going on inside. And if you understand that they're saying it that way, then the story about Solomon, oh, wow. Am I choosing the live baby or the dead baby? Am I acting like the blessing mother or the cursing mother? Which character are you in that? Well, you're all of them. And you also have access to Solomon's wisdom. then it becomes, yeah, it's about you, just like you said, Cam. So thanks for sharing that. And I hope what I said about it was also helpful.
Yeah, this whole conversation's been mind blowing. It's been very, I don't know, it's just opened. Obviously, it's new information that I've not really looked into before, but it's opened my eyes to a lot. So you've
Yeah,
actually,
and it's answered a big question I've had for a while. Like, I've always felt with religions and beliefs, they're very similar in a way, but I've never really put my finger on it. And obviously today, this podcast, you've articulated and put it all together, and it's pieced it together like pretty well in my head how it all just slots in, and it makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense.
Well, thanks for that. And you know, I am just in awe of these ancient myths because they're like an ancient treasure that was given to all the different people. Every culture has this like heirloom that they received from their
right.
ancestors, that their ancestors have been preserving. It's like, oh, let me pass this on to and they're just profound. And why would we not want to incorporate them into our life? It's they're there for our help and our benefit.
It's definitely made me, going forward, when I read any myths or look into any myths, look at it with a different perspective. 100%.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah,
Well,
I'm glad to hear it.
I've been wanting to ask, so for our audience that are listening, because it's been a very intriguing conversation, where would, out of your books that you've got, because you've got just the way your outlook on life, I mean, we were throwing politics at you, and you made politics make a lot more sense than it does. So, but if someone was to want to read more on you, what book would you recommend they start with, or where do you recommend they start with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So, in terms of books, I believe it's up to 11, and I would start most recent and go backwards. Why? Okay. Because my thought has evolved, just like anybody else should. I've learned along the way, and so my most recent books will have my most recent perspective on it. So my most recent one is called Invoking the Ancient Gods in You. That was just published in late 2023. Okay. Before that was Myth and Trauma, which came out in 2020, which I didn't know 2020 was going to be a giant trauma, but when I started the book in like 2019. So that's my second most recent. So I would go back kind of in that order. But I also have a website called starmythworld.com. It's short for Star Myths of the World, which has a blog on it. You can go back through the years and read stuff for free on there. And it connects to videos and stuff that are free. I've got a YouTube channel. And then the other thing I'll say, when you ask where should people start, books are great. Obviously, you can cram a ton of information into a book. Like that would take 100 hours to do a video for a 200-page book, right? But video has its own strengths. So I've created a series of videos explaining this system under my other website, undyingstars.com. They're both linked to each other, so you can get from one to the other. But I called it the Undying Stars Academy, and I've got 4 videos on there. One's called Celestial Mechanics and the Myths, and it explains like what we're seeing in the sky and how it all moves through the year. What is solstice? What is equinox? What is precession? What are the cycles of the moon? And how are the myths using them? The motion of the path of the ecliptic throughout the year, through the zodiac, blah, 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 and how that relates to the system. So it's called Celestial Mechanics and the Myths because it tries to lay out the system. And then there's another one called Recovering Our Deeper Self that also gets into these are videos. It's like me talking. It's like a college course with PowerPoint type. Okay, let's look at this, blah, 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 blah. It's like 10 or 12 hours of video courses for $50 each. So there's 4 courses. And then 2 of them are called Celestial Bible Tour, Part 1 and Part 2. And Part 2, Part 2 is the most recent. you could even start with that one if you want. And those are all relating Bible stories back to recovery of self. So I show the Bible story, I show how it's based on the stars, and then I show how it's relating to this topic of recovery of self.
Right. Okay, cool.
So those are cool.
Yeah, well, when you say you sit and talk through a presentation, that is 100% my way of consuming information. With books, what I tend to find myself doing is reading a book that an author's written, and then getting a few chapters in, and then going over to YouTube and thinking, like, when you get a little bit too tired or you lose focus on the book, then go over to YouTube and then listen to the author talking. And then I don't end up reading the rest of the book because I just listen to them on YouTube.
Yeah, it was like I was saying about the Manson book by Tom O'Neill. It's almost better to listen to 10 of his podcasts before you try and dive into that book, because it's an encyclopedia. It's a great book. I'm not knocking it. It's an important book. Everyone should have it on their bookshelf because it's an important juncture in human history. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. So the celestial mechanics and the myths, or the celestial Bible tour, and even start with part 2 if you want, because that gets into the story of Joseph, the story of Moses crossing the Red Sea, the story of David, the story of Solomon. I mean, they're all, you can start with part 1 if you want, but part 2 is the most recent one. It might be the most accessible one, celestial Bible tour. Yeah, start where you want. But I agree, my books are like, I want these books, hopefully in 100 years, the books will still be around. I don't know if people will still be watching videos. In 100 years, we'll all be immersed in immersive reality. Maybe all my old YouTube videos will just be like boring black and white silent movies to the people of the future.
Oh, well, this has been great.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, but I'll leave your links to the website, the multiple websites, YouTube, and some book links in the descriptions as well. But thank you for coming on and going through this with us today. It's been very different. I just love from when we started connecting. When we me and Aaron introed what we've been doing on Alt-ernative and went over the politics and the spirituality, the way you brought that together just after that, I think that just set up the rest of the course of the call.
Yeah, stay away from the right. They're for feudalism and oligarchy.
No,
but the new left is crazy. Anyway, no, I'm joking. I really appreciate it, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to meet you. I wish you all the best, and let's cross paths again when I come over. I've never been to England. We can
come over and we'll show you around some of the spots.
That would be awesome. I got to get to Stonehenge someday.
Yeah, well, let us know when you come and we'll travel around a few spots together.
Yeah, cheers. I appreciate that. Well, likewise when you come to Australia.
100%. All right.
Thanks everyone
for listening.
Thanks, David.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Cheers, guys. Bye.